for go live. Behind the blue curtain. Yes. All right, we hit this button. And hello and welcome to Derps Talk About Games. I'm your co-host, Mango.
And I am your co-host, Buddy.
And today we're going to talk a little bit about Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. Before we do that, buddy, why don't you let us know what it is we do on this podcast?
Well, on this podcast, we only talk about the most timely superhero movie news. There's definitely no more important superhero movies that have come out and are like the biggest movie of the year and everything. Definitely not.
Well, you know, the reason we're late on this one is because Buddy made me watch all the Fast and Furious movies. So this is your fault,
That's
Buddy.
true. This is my fault. That is accurate.
No, we were thinking about doing this combined with Spider-Man, but I wasn't able to see it because I am an idiot. I will take this one on myself. I bought tickets and everything to go see it on Friday night, and then realized I had a meeting at the end of the day that would have overlapped with the start time. So we're just going to do Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, which, you know, as is our standard, we'll give you our pre-spoiler impressions before we get into spoilers. Buddy, what did you think of this movie?
I loved it. I loved every minute of it. Actually, that's not true. I did not love every minute. This movie took a while to really get on board for me, but I came away with very positive impressions, I guess is what I say. My biggest takeaway from this one is how crazy it felt watching this. And I did not, it's sort of like, I don't know, it's almost like a frog boiling sort of like moment or whatever, where I just kind of didn't realize how much I was sort of starved for this kind of, you know, I don't know, this kind of a superhero movie. And I just feel like I haven't had one in years. And yeah, it was really good. I really liked reconnecting with these characters. I'm very glad that the lore felt, not, I want to say grounded, even though it is the opposite of grounded. It was grounded in the story of the Guardians of the Galaxy, right? Something that I think has maybe been affecting Marvel for a while, we could talk a little bit more about this when it comes to sort of like deeper stuff, is the ways in which there is no big crossover that's being worked towards, like there was with Thanos, right? And how the sort of simultaneous lack of direction but forceful inclusion of these other sorts of pieces of the, you know, like the Marvel Cinematic Universe, have kind of weighed down the stories, which are at their core about, you know, like relatable characters doing, you know, tough, hard, heroic things, right? Guardians of the Galaxy just has none of that. There is very little, as far as I could see, that was like indicative of the future of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. There's no cool teases or whatever. There's no, you know, next time this person is coming back doing this. It's just like none of that stuff. It is just, these are characters that you like doing their stuff. Take a look at their story. That's what matters. And I really missed that, I guess, about the MCU. So I don't know. I had a great time.
Yeah, I will agree. I had a fantastic time at this movie. I will agree with you. It took a little while to get me on board. I found some of the acting, especially early, to be a little bit wooden out of some of the characters. But that kind of all blended into the background relatively quickly. And I really enjoyed it. I cried several times during this movie. Some of that was just kind of like, some of it was like feelings bait, right? And I'm particularly susceptible to that, but you know, it made me feel the feelings. So, you know, I thought it was pretty good. I'll give it my my stamp of approval. It was a lot of fun. Do I have anything else general pre-spoiler to say for? You know, something I think this movie did particularly well that we can get into without really doing spoilers is, and this is what I think these movies are kind of known for, is like great use of licensed music, right? Like James, like, you know, that's kind of a theme, right? Like, less kind of pure text, right? Like in the first two volumes, Star-Lord has, you know, like like the first one especially revolves kind of around his cassette tape that he got from his mom, and that kind of gets updated, and he gets a Zune at the end of the last one, and there is definitely shows up here, but it's not nearly as integral. But I think the licensed music definitely is super integral. Um, and it's super well done, and I want to give it a big thumbs up for that. But otherwise, I think we should get into spoilers for specifics. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, this is your spoiler warning. Spoilers for Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. Also, probably 2 and 1, and, other aspects of the MCU up to this point. So have your warning. But before we get to the spoiler warning, something I wanted to say, just to follow on to your point, it's the first time one of these. This is, I think, the best Marvel movie, at least since the pandemic, probably longer. And so I want to give, this, if you are someone who got tired of the cape shit, as I kind of started to do, I think this one's worth a watch. Yeah,
I absolutely agree with that. Especially because it is remarkably unstructured, like a cape shit movie, which I thought was interesting. Right? There is a big bad, and he is doing things, but most of the plot is motivated almost entirely by personal sort of relationships and stakes, right?
Yeah.
Like, and this is part of what felt so refreshing. The impetus of this is not, oh, here's some new big villain in town and he's doing something big and evil. The impetus of this is our friend is hurt and he might die if we don't figure out how to save his life. And that was just like, what a revelation, right? So a character I care about is hurt, and they need to go on an adventure in order to like find the MacGuffin that'll save his life, right?
So, this is, I think this is important. I'm going to put the hard spoiler warning here because I think the direct comparison is Ant-Man, Quantumania.
Interesting.
Because, and so again, here's your hard spoiler wall, right? So like both movies start out relatively similar, right? Like a little bit of intro and then straight into the fucking conflict, right? Like Adam Warlock shows up and like beats the shit out of Rocket and they need to go find the MacGuffin. Similarly, they get sucked down into the quantum zone. And that's like, to your point, like the difference is that Kang is this like potentially like world altering villain, where this is just kind of like, they want to help out Rocket, right? Like almost to the point where like, towards the end, it's a little bit absurd because, like, there's literally a world-ending event that just happens, right? Mostly off-screen, right? Like, literally an entire Earth, counter-Earth, is destroyed, and we don't really care about it so much, right? Like, because it is about these personal level stakes. I think that's like a weird, like, that pinged me intellectually. Like I knew that was a little bit weird that we were looking at that, but ultimately, it's kind of like, this is kind of just, I guess, how cosmic scale stuff happens, right? Like the cosmic level stories happen is you kind of don't care because it's not Earth, even if it kind of looks like Earth. But but I thought it was super interesting, like you said, that it was very personal stakes. Like the High Evolutionary, like we like, all other things considered, we don't really need to care about him, at least, potentially, like, not yet. Like, there's a version of this story where, like, he gets away, and in, like, 7 years, he's the big bad, but, like, he's not. So, yeah.
Yeah. That was like a big thing for me, was how personal the stakes were, and that there didn't need to be any kind of, I feel like there's a certain level sort of like heavy-handedness that gets layered on top of these movies sometimes, right? Where you kind of don't have to do that, right? Even with movies that I think have really tremendous villains, or like world-ending stakes and conflicts that I think are good, typically they spend a lot of time kind of setting out these like personal, like these very personal questions. And that seems to be the case with what, Guardians was doing here, right? The core conflict for the first 2/3 of the movie is just, can they figure out a way to save Rocket's life before he dies? And then interspersed with this, you're getting these flashbacks to like Rocket's incredibly depressing backstory. Like, Jesus Christ. Like simultaneously depressing, but also like horrifying in a way that is just like left me in like a visceral just place. Like, oh my God, the horror that was being included sort of next to it was the juxtaposition that really got me. It's like the horror next to the wholesome kind of cuteness, and this is going to end poorly. You know there's no way this ends well, which I actually think is a really interesting use of a flashback, right? Because typically one of the things that people talk about when they talk about flashbacks is like, oh, the flashback isn't interesting because you know the results of it to a certain extent, right? This was an example of the flashback was interesting specifically because you know the results of it. You know they don't get a happy ending, right?
Yeah.
That these are 4 kind of like animal hybrid test subject things who are going to have some terrible thing happen to them because when we meet Rocket, he's alone.
I was saying,
and I just
the best ending you can hope for is that they're still trapped on the ship, right? Like that he had to leave them behind and he promised to come back for them. And it is so much worse, right?
Oh my God. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I mean, part of it is just like, I don't want to like, I don't know how to like, because they're animals, but they're also sort of smart, but like clearly all of them, except for maybe Lila, right? Oh, I'm sorry, Lila is her name, right?
Yes,
The
yeah.
otter. Yeah, Lila. Okay. Maybe Lila is kind of like on Rocket's level or whatever. But Floor and
Teefs.
Teefs, yeah, are clearly like dumber. You know,
Yeah.
dumber is a worse. It's like childlike is really what it
Yeah,
what it is,
and I
right?
think that's part of it too, is right, is that they are like children, right? Like, and that's
Yeah.
part of what makes it so.
And so it is like the just like the it's this concoction, right, of body horror, because like Teef's like eyes are sewn open and you can see it and it's just like right. Or the way that Floor has this like clamp over her mouth, and has to sort of like speak with this speaker that is just
Yeah.
kind of like enunciating.
She's kind of like the baby head spider from Toy Story. Like
Oh my God, yeah.
that was like the thing I immediately thought of, because she's also got like spider like limbs, right? Like they're mechanical, but yeah.
Yeah, but they're also cute, fuzzy animals, and they're also childlike and innocent, right? And it's just like all of that together, just like I don't know. I think it dodged the there's certain things that will sort of trigger my manipulation switch, let's say, right? Like I've described this before in Pixar films sometimes, like in Inside Out, there's the moment with the imaginary friend, where he is like tailor made to pull on your heartstrings, and that immediately disconnects my heartstrings, right? It's like, oh, I see what you're doing. Like, get the fuck out of here. You know what I mean? But because like, I don't know, this is just different. I was bought in to the, to the story and to the experience. And it just felt, like new in a way that, oh God, holy shit.
So
I did not have a good time with that section.
So something that I think this is like, I want to say this is like the best use of a trailer, right? Because like there's a shot in the trailer of Racoon, of Rocket and Lila hugging, right? And so like the whole time I'm like, oh, and like I had seen it a little while ago, and if you know what you're looking for, you can tell he's younger, but like it's not super obvious, right? So I'm like, oh, they're gonna meet up at some point, where they're gonna be reunited, maybe, right? And then the hug happens like immediately. It's like, oh no, and it's like 2 seconds later is when she gets shot, right? Like,
Yep.
It's like perfect fucking trailer bait, right? Like, and I just want to shout that as like a very effective use of kind of like baiting out that using the trailer effectively to kind of like mislead and like rug pull in a very, very effective, and I think a very positive. Like I want to give them props for that, right? Because like I thought that was pretty good, and it got me right. Like that was just, and I gotta give props to, what's this actor's name? His name is Chakudi Iwuji.
I see.
The high
evolutionary.
evolutionary. Yeah, he did a great job of just being fucking out of his gourd, right? Like,
Yep.
He sold it, and like, I don't know. I feel like almost scenery chewingly, but like in a good way, right? Like in a way that like didn't like, it felt over the top, but it felt authentic, right? It didn't feel like he was like chewing the scenery usually feels like you're overacting, right? Here it felt authentic to the character, in a way that like really kind of like hit home, right? Like I thought it was a really good job done by him. I think he was probably one of the better actors in the whole film, right? Like I said, I found like part of it is sometimes it's hard because like Drax, Mantis, and Nebula are all supposed to be a little bit wooden by design, and sometimes it kind of gets muddled with like what I think is not the greatest performance, but um, uh, yeah, I just thought he did a really excellent job. Yeah.
No, I agree with you. I wish there's nothing that's stuck in my head in the same way that like blow that piece of junk out of the sky sticks in my head, or even just like that is what you've taken from me, right? Like the line that Zod says, right? Just like there are some of these. A scenery chewing villain is perfect bait to just stick in my brain for the rest of my fucking life, apparently. And weirdly, he dodged that. I can't think of anything that the High Evolutionary said that just like imprinted itself on my cortex, and I'm never gonna let it go. But I also just think that he had an interesting. One of the things that was neat about it is he just is an unapologetic, straightforward villain,
Yeah.
right? Which I have also been thirsting for in a lot of ways. I talked about this in the No Way Home stuff, and we're doing the Flash this week. Hope to God this works out. I have a huge problem with the sort of multiversal meta ethics that are being played by a lot of these superhero movies, kind of at the moment. With No Way Home and with Multiverse of Madness kind of being like top tier in this problem in a lot of ways, in the sense that like it is like a typical superhero movie is a story of selfishness to selflessness, right? But we've kind of ditched that, and now we're doing this sort of like superhero trolley problem on a cosmic scale, right? Which I just kind of loathe in all of its forms. Because I just don't think that it makes for good or compelling kind of either like a good or compelling like thematic underpinning to some of these superhero movies, or a good or compelling underpinning to like characters and their motivations and that kind of thing, right? Um, and it was just really refreshing that we just kind of got a classic villain archetype, right? This is a uncaring, piece of shit who looks at everything as a Lego brick to try and create his perfect universe. He is motivated by that simple core belief. I want to create perfection, and when things are not perfect, I throw them in the incinerator, and I don't give a fuck, whether or not they are living, thinking beings that deserve some form of empathy from me, right? And I'm undone by my own hubris, right? I get obsessed with the raccoon who is smarter than me, and it torches my entire empire, right? I bring it crumbling to the ground because I am so consumed with the insecurity, right? That this raccoon saw something that I didn't and fixed a problem that I couldn't, right? Um, be just beautiful, simple storytelling. I mean, simple is the wrong word. It's not simple. It's actually pretty complex. It's just
Straightforward.
like yeah, straightforward and like well worn, right? We
Yeah.
understand this character archetype kind of in the same way. Right? This is the same sort of compliment I've given about Aquaman and Orm a million times, right? Straightforward story. We've seen it. This is the Excalibur story. In Rocket's case, right? This is a story about a villain with too much hubris, right? He is undone by his hubris and his inability to change. This is super core storytelling stuff, and I am all here for it because I feel like we have been circling this stupid fucking drain about when is it right to change the future? Can we sacrifice one person for billion? It's just like, fucking shoot me. Like, I don't ever want to have to deal with that, right? And I just kind of appreciate that we just sidestepped all of this stuff. We didn't deal with any of it, right? And this is also true, by the way, of other like pieces of cosmic bullshit that's happening in Marvel as well, right? Like not just kind of multiverse stuff with kind of like Kang, right? But it just dodges everything, right? We're not dealing with Skrulls, we're not dealing with Captain Marvel, we're not dealing with the Kree Empire, we're not dealing with any of that stuff. which just kind of leaves this story to be its own thing. It is self-contained. It is not being intruded upon by the greater Marvel Cinematic Universe, except for one glaring example that I will talk about. And that works great. That works fine. As a comics reader, this is kind of my final, really my final thing. As a comics reader, it feels like going back to my core comics story after a crossover, because something that happens when you're reading monthly books and comics, right, is basically every year there's a big momentous crossover, and that crossover splinters out into a million individual books, right? So Civil War is maybe the best example of this. With Civil War, right, here is this big thing that's happening in the Marvel Cinematic, or in the Marvel universe, right? And your comic, your favorite comic, no matter as big, a flagship title like Spider-Man, right, or a tiny little small title like, I don't even know, X Factor, right? They're all kind of impacted by Civil War. This is typically seen as a good thing. There are times when this is a good thing, right? But most of the time, what tends to happen is your small story is yanked out of kind of its place in the universe and thrust into this other story that feels unnatural, that interrupts everything, that just kind of gets in the way, right? And then after a couple of issues, it goes back to the small sort of spot in the universe that it's supposed to be in, and all is sort of right in the world, right? Guardians 3 feels like the moment of going back to the spot in the universe where we don't have to care about what Iron Man is doing in the Avengers books. We can just care about these characters that we've connected to, right? And so I don't know. That's like my big spiel.
Yeah, no, I mean, and to your point about just I guess about like the kind of straightforwardness of the high evolutionary. Like, to your point, I don't think anything he particularly said stuck in my head, but like just that moment at the end where he's just like raging and screaming at Rocket while throwing him around, right? Like that kind of moment, right? Because I think that's like, that's like when like the the mask comes off, both figuratively and literally, right? Like,
Yeah.
Because like, up until this point, there's at least like this plausibility that's like, it's not just that it's not actually that he's smarter. It's that he had an original thought, right? And that's something unique that the high evolutionary needs because he can't replicate that in other species, right? But it's revealed that it is that, the high evolutionary thinks that Rocket thinks he's better than him, and that's what has infuriated him so, and that is what has like driven him on this like careening path of destruction, right? Like,
Yep.
Yeah. So I absolutely agree with you 110% there. And I think just to kind of like bring it back to my point about Quantumania, right? Like, Quantumania felt like it was like basically nothing but set up for Kang, right? In a lot of ways. And that would like it's interesting, like like you said, through kind of like a reverse mirror, because like it is ostensibly about personal stakes mostly, right? It's about Scott getting his daughter back from Kang, right? With a little bit of like neat stuff thrown in, but it's all in service of setting Kang up for his whole bit, right? Like his whole nonsense bit. So
yeah, it's interesting because you're right. Theoretically, there are personal stakes to both movies, but for some reason, Scott wanting to get his daughter back and the team wanting to save Rocket's life just feel completely different to me. One of them feels very inauthentic and the other feels very authentic, actually. Yeah. Is kind of what I would say.
Well, so I think part of it is that like the Rocket, like the high evolutionary is like in the way of them saving Rocket, right? Like the primary goal is to save Rocket, whereas like, but for the concerns about Kang, they could kind of like figure out how to get out, right? Like if even though there's similar arcs, it feels like the emphasis is reversed, right? Like Star-Lord doesn't give a shit about the high evolutionary, right? Like pretty openly and pretty directly, right? They don't even like interact for like 95% of the movie, right? He's just like the thing that's in the way that is blocking the means to the end of saving Rocket, right? Whereas like Kang is like the primary focus kind of like, and they are forced to interact with him because he's captured Scott's daughter, not kind of the other way around. Like I'm not articulating this well, but it's kind of like the driving force is actually very different, even though kind of surface level they seem kind of similar. Um, yeah, I don't know if you've got any more thoughts on that, but
yeah, I don't know. I guess I see what you're saying. I agree. I don't have any more complicated thoughts there. The one thing I will mention, going back to that thing I said about where the Marvel Cinematic Universe does butt in its head, is with Gamora. There's this thing with Gamora. This is where the movie is at its absolute worst, and I hate it. I actually, to be fair, I like the moment itself. I think that it is required, but it's required in the same way that, like, you cauterize a wound, right? When you have to, like, cut off someone's gangrenous arm. Okay. It is the best that you can make out of a bad situation. I did not quite conceptualize the damage that Infinity War and Endgame did to the Guardians of the Galaxy until this movie, where they, it is really difficult to get Gamora back into the story, and when it does, the whole momentum of the plot stops dead in its tracks in order to sit there and have to explain the, like, what happened, right? And also try and work it like a, star-shaped peg into a round hole, right? Into something that can resolve the ongoing tension with Star-Lord and the Guardians in general, right? There's just no way, there's just like no way to do that well. And so, like I said, they kind of just had to sit there and take it. They had to cauterize the wound. They had to just like create a bunch of scar tissue, kind of made the best out of the situation. I don't think that there's a world where it would have been better to leave Gamora unsaid, because, like, it's such an important part of Star-Lord's character, right?
Yeah.
And he is so obsessed with it, right? But I just, like, I don't know. I feel like James Gunn got just dealt a real, like 2/7 off suit, right? What are you gonna do with this?
I don't think it's quite that bad. Like I see what you're saying, but I think there is a version of the story, like without most of those shenanigans where, like, Gamora just dies, right? Like, and Peter has to deal with the grief, right? Like that is clearly what he's trying to do. Is he's trying to spin the classic kind of like Peter has to go through the the stages of grief to deal with Gamora. And the twist here is that Gamora's there, right? It's just like not the one he knows, right? Like, and so, I think it's an interesting thing, but like you said, because the mechanics of how that happened are integral to the meta, like the meta part of the MCU, it kind of like causes a bunch of weirdness to happen, right? And because like there is maybe a version of this where, like, she came back in this movie, right? Like, or something, right? Like, there would be the trailer moment where, like, it's like, like he's, like he's looking around and like the character, robed character turns around and it's Gamora, and that's the big mystery for this movie. No, that happened in a previous movie, but they actually have to deal with the resolution. Like, normally you would do that kind of like reveal and resolution within its own movie, and I think the bad part is that the reveal happens in a previous movie that is also, like, 4 or 5 years ago at this point, right? Like, and can't, like, and also in, like, not a direct, like, this didn't happen in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. This happened in a movie that you can't reasonably, you can reasonably expect people to, like, kind of know what happened in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. You can't really reasonably expect people to know what happened in all of these other fucking movies, right? So you're divorcing the reveal that she's back from the actual resolution of that problem, right? Like, and then I think that's where the biggest trip up is, right? Because I do think there's, like, an interesting nub there. It's just, like you said, it has to come to a screeching halt because of, like, the weird execution problems.
Yeah, I mean, I never want to be a person that says that there's no good way to do this. I believe in the ingenuity of right? There is a good way to do anything, no matter what it is, right?
Yeah.
There is no idea too stupid that you can't have a good enough writer make it good, right? Um, but there are some writing problems that are harder than others, and this one was
Sure.
pretty tough. I do think a version of things where just Gamora's fucking dead. That's it. That's the resolution,
Sure.
right? She dies in Infinity War, and we don't do any of this stuff with her fucking other not even other universe, other timeline doppelganger is probably a better, cleaner way to have done this whole thing. But in a world in which they set up that Gamora comes back but is fake Gamora with no memories in Endgame, there's like, oh god, it's just so hard to get around that sort of issue. And it just really ground this story to a halt to have to kind of like deal with some of that and explain some of that stuff. Like there's a whole scene in an elevator where he's like laying it out, and I can tell that what they're trying to do is like James Gunn wants to make it a joke, right? Oh, I'm going to explain the really complicated plot mechanics here really fast because that kind of overcomplication is funny. But I don't know. It just was not funny. I found it really obtrusive, and I hated every second of it.
Yeah, no, I mean, I thought it was fun for what it was, but I get what you're saying, right? Like, it would have been better if it didn't have, like, and I think I agree with you. I think best option is she dies, and he's just dealing with the grief kind of like in isolation, right? Second best is she comes back in this movie rather than coming back in Endgame, right? Third best is, you have someone competent try and do it, which is what happened here, right? Like, yeah. So to your point, something that I thought was interesting though was like, you were right. There's not a lot of like meta MCU stuff, but there are a lot of like weird cameos, right? Like I think every character that has been in a Guardians movie that's still in canon alive shows up in this movie at some point, right? Like there's the poker game with like Howard the Duck and the Collector and like 4 other characters that I thought was fun. And what was there's another one, a piece of this that now is escape. Oh, apparently Pete Davidson was in this movie. The other person I'm thinking of is Nathan Fillion plays like the head security guard, right? Like it felt like this, and what was the end? I think it was Fast X is what I'm thinking of. It's like, it feels like there's just like a ton of cameos because people want to be part of this thing, right? Like, which I don't know how I feel about that, right? Like the characters I'm more okay with, like, Nathan Fillion as like always, Captain Reynolds, right? That's the character's name in Firefly, right? Like Nathan Fillion is destined to be a cameo because everybody loved Firefly, but it only got 6 episodes or whatever, right? Like, even though he has been on, I think it's called The Rookie, for like much longer than Firefly ever went on. I don't think anybody, at least in kind of like the nerd universe,
first he
cares
was
about
on
that show.
Castle, then he was on The Rookie.
Oh, I thought those were the same show. You saying Castle reminded me they're not the same.
They are two different shows.
Yeah, but he's long past Firefly, but that's like he's still Firefly man to everybody. Yeah. Do you have any thoughts about like that kind of stuff, like the cameo aspect or whatever? Just because it felt like there was a lot, right?
I like it from the certain movies earn this, certain movies don't. The Guardians movies, in my opinion, have very much earned this, and that is okay. You know what I mean? Like, also I would say like the Fast and Furious movies have earned this, but there are some movies that don't earn this and I think are funny. Honestly, one of them is Transformers. I saw Transformers Rise of the Beast over this weekend. Not a super great film, but there's some stuff in there that is like kind of in the same sort of level, and it's a little wild, to be honest. Bumblebee does the same sort of thing. The Pirates of the Caribbean movies, when they were still being made, I guess, was also a similar sort of thing where it's like there are movies that care about continuity that I'm like, who is for? Who is the person who really cares about the like underlying world building and logic of the Pirates of the Caribbean movies, right? Or the Transformers movies, right? Who is the person who's there who's like, oh my god, that's Agent Simmons from Sector 7. He's back. It's like, what? No one cares. No one cares about that stuff, right? I don't know. So yeah, I felt like basically everything was fine with this stuff, especially because it's all treated with like reverence, which I appreciate quite a lot, right?
Yeah, yeah, no,
In the same
that's
way that I appreciate the like sincerity behind Fast and Furious.
yeah. Speaking of Fast and Furious, there was a moment that I was kind of mad because it's just like this terrible missed opportunity when it's who is it? It's Nebula, Star Lord, and Groot are driving to the pyramid with the High Evolutionary. And he's like failing. Chris or Star Lord's failing to drive, right? And he says to Nebula, "Do you want to drive?" I so badly wanted Groot to say, "I am Groot," and so I would say something like, "What are you talking about? A quarter mile at a time," or something like that. Since it's Vin Diesel, right? Like I was like, "Oh, come on," right? Like also like it's also like a very kind of like family movie, and there's like family that you make movie, and there's like no reference to that. It was right there. It was right there, and they didn't take it. They didn't take it. But that's just me wanting. This is just you poisoning my brain with Fast and Furious references that I want to see in everything now. But yeah. So what else is there? So something I did appreciate was the kind of high evolutionary world building aspect, right? Like the beyond how it directly influenced the plot, the idea that he's like he builds this like furry world, right? And like them not being aggro monsters isn't enough because they just turn into like people with like different animal forms, right? With all the problems that those have. And I thought the kind of subtle world building there was pretty good. I wouldn't say it's quite John Wick levels, but it's pretty. I think it's pretty good. I think the all the implied stuff in there was like really interesting and kind of a treat because you don't always get that, right? You've got a lot of like text and you get a lot of kind of like, whoa, isn't it crazy that these things are happening? And they're kind of happy to let like everything be inferred and sit in place and not have like 1,000 questions about it. So I thought that was cool. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that. I don't know, there's something really unique about the world building here that I don't know how to really wrap my head around. It is a uniquely James Gunn thing because I think it is also bled into specifically the Suicide Squad, right? Which also had this kind of level of like the world sort of works on Looney Tunes logic in certain ways, but that's okay. And I don't know how to thread that needle. So yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah. So you have any other parts of this that you want to talk about? It's a long movie, right? Like
yeah, that's true. I want to talk a little bit about I guess some of the action that was on screen. This is not something I think has ever been really a strong suit of the Guardians movies. But I will say even though I think the action was generally pretty bad and not super interesting, one thing that this movie did pretty great was showcase superpowers in a way that I feel like I haven't seen in a long time. Where like something that used to happen in a lot of older sort of movie like superhero movies, right? Like kind of the first generation of superhero movies in the early 2000s. It was like a little more of a focus on like cool uses of superpowers in ways that like we wouldn't otherwise think or do.
Yeah,
And that stuff I think
uses,
has been yeah. But like Nebula's arm being able to like change forms gets used all the time in this. And I thought that was really sort of cool and sort of neat. This is where we get to see Rocket's like kind of ingenuity on display, right? Where he can kind of craft anything out of it, right? And I thought that was really cool and really neat. Mantis is doing some better, more interesting stuff that I think that she was doing with kind of her emotional manipulation powers. It was basically being just sort of used as like a sleep touch spell in like Avengers Infinity War, but here she does some comedic stuff with it, but also just some like useful stuff with it. That's like, oh hey, I understand how a person who has this kind of power set can do something fundamentally useful for us here, right? And I just think that stuff is cool, and I wanted to call it out because I liked it.
Yeah, Groot gets his like kaiju element and his wings, and
Oh yeah.
I will say that I generally agree with you. The action wasn't spectacular. I do think I'm a sucker for like fight scene to music, and I think the scene they did with that I thought was really good. The kind of like I'm going to call it the Kingsman style scene just because like I think that's like the kind of the famous
The
modern
trope
touch point.
originator, yeah.
Yeah.
What was the song they did?
It was free. It was Freebird in Kingsman. I don't remember what it was in this one. It was Beastie Boys. It was
Oh, you're right. Yeah.
yeah.
It was Beastie Boys.
Again, a great use of licensed music.
I have to say, this has sort of been a poster year for kind of like good use of like licensed music. We talked about it in the Fast and Furious, right, where they used the Far Side song to sort of set up like that car from like the 90s with John Cena. I don't know, there's some other stuff in Transformers and in Spider-Verse that also, is neat when it comes to the use of music. I wonder, are we? I guess we're taking cues. We're figuring it out. Kind of like the pop music as soundtrack, which is neat.
Yeah, no, I mean, and I'm sure that Barbie will at least have one usage of the Barbie song, right? The Barbie girl. But yeah. But yeah. You want to talk about like the heartstring moments in this? Because like I said, like there were a bunch of moments that like the scene where Rocket is dying and like going towards the light, and Lila turns him around, and Star Lord is like, like I'm not going to lose him. Like that like got me. That really got me. I cried. I'm not afraid to admit it. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I definitely cried during this movie, but I did see it a month ago, so I can't kind of
Yeah.
don't remember where. It must have been that moment, right, when they were when it looked like Rocket was like going to fucking die. Because to be honest, I thought he was. I thought he was going to die. Because I don't know why I was convinced of this. But I just felt like, I don't know, maybe it's just really good storytelling that they kind of got me with that one. Yeah, I don't know. It's interesting. I don't know offhand what I would say is the best or way to make these sort of heartstring moments work, right? Um but I don't know. They worked. A lot of this is just kind of like the emotional baggage that I was able to build up over the two preceding movies. Like I get that these characters care about each other,
Yeah.
right? And maybe I don't even know that I want to say this because I don't believe it. I don't think Chris Pratt is a really good actor, but maybe he's just a good enough actor that he sold me on that.
So I don't think Chris Pratt is like the greatest actor, but I think he's good at a handful of different things, and like I think he sells like genuine caring pretty well, right? Like especially when he's like live acting, right? Like I would speak to his kind of like you know what? Maybe I don't believe that, but it works well in Guardians for whatever reason, right? Like maybe James Gunn is good enough director there, but I also thought like you know I thought he like was good at being Andy in Parks and Rec, and I think he's good at being Star Lord. Um, I don't know if that's direction or just him caring enough, like because I didn't think he was great in the Jurassic Park movies. Like he's like one of these actors that's like in everything now for whatever reason.
Yeah.
Like I didn't think his portrayal of Super Mario was particularly inspiring or anything. Um, so I don't know. Chalk it up to direction. Chalk it up to him like caring about certain things, not about others.
The writing is good enough,
Yeah.
that it kind of carries it.
But like,
Yeah.
I don't know if it's like saying caring. Maybe it's like, maybe it's kind of. I feel like Star Lord and Andy are like basically the same character, right? Like Star Lord is like a fitter Andy in space, right? Like, And maybe he's just like good at that character. Maybe it's close enough to who Chris Pratt is as a person, right? Like that he can sell it, and like the other roles are just not. Because like I don't think he does it like that's good writing in that it's written to the actor, not necessarily good writing in kind of like I don't think it's solely on the writing, but I also agree with you that I don't think he's like the world's greatest actor.
Yeah, you know what I think it is. I think the bar for sort of excellence is on the writing. It's not on the actor. I kind of feel like most reasonably accomplished anybody who is a good actor could sell this, right? It is on the back of the writing and the directing to create the moment, right? To put a reasonable actor in there. You probably could have done this with most people, like most, I don't know, movie leading men. You could put Chris Pine in here and it would have been fine. You could have put, Chris Hemsworth in here and it would have been fine. I don't think there's anything that's particularly unique about Chris Pratt. I don't think that he is stretching to any kind of, like heights of acting skill, but you do need somebody of like a kind of minimum quality in order to get it done. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think about it a little bit of like in kind of like a slightly different causality thing, because I think you're mostly right. Like I think there is a version of this played by Chris Pine. I think it's very different, but I think the writing thing here is that it is written for Chris Pratt and it's written well for Chris Pratt, so Chris Pratt can like be his best Chris Pratt self.
As like a real part of this that I think is valuable, that I don't know how to capture, I guess, is the duality of grief, right? That he is already kind of grieving Gamora in real time, right? And being put in this position where he is terrified he's going to have to. I think that's the thing that makes it such a good moment, right? It's those two things kind of layered right on top of one another. And that's sort of what I mean when I say it's like good writing, it's like good directing, right? Like it is just, I don't know, like that's like a structural story thing that happens in the script phase, that makes it work, I guess.
Yeah, I agree with that. I definitely agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah, how much did you like this stuff on like doing bits in, something we've complained about a lot in MCU movies is like the bathos and all that sort of stuff. There's obviously a lot of humor in this one,
I think it's appropriately partitioned, right? Like there is no, like so the hallmark of like really like bad bathos is like when it undercuts a dramatic moment, right? Like the classic example we always talk about is like, Mark Ruffalo, as Bruce Banner is like, realizes what he has to do in order to like save the day. And it's, jump out of this copter onto the Rainbow Bridge and become the Hulk. And he kind of face plants onto the Rainbow Bridge. And it's like, okay, you've undercut the moment, right? All the funny moments are positioned such that they are not undercutting dramatic moments, I think, right? Like they are in the appropriate place, right? Like, like I saw that freaking like, she's a good dog moment happening from a mile fucking away, right? Like I knew that moment was going to happen at some point. And then like, as soon as they were standing, Sean Gunn's character, because I never remember the name of, is like starting to do his like whistle thing where he's like clearly going to do it, right? And we get the cameo from Yondu from Beyond the Grave, right? Like, oh, and the last moment of this is, Cosmo's going to come in and he's going to say she's a good dog, and that's going to be the thing, right? Like, or at some point, right? Like, either I didn't know which order it was going to happen. It was like, that's what's going to happen. And of course that's what happens. But that is like not a high drama moment, right? Like that is like, a little self-contained moment, and it's resolution of kind of like a setup, and it's like funny and heartwarming, and it's fine, right? But it's not like, it's not like in the middle of like, the High Evolutionary screaming at Rocket, right? Like, Star-Lord says like heads up and like throws a basketball at his head or something, right? Like,
yes. Oh my God. Yeah, that would have been real dumb, but it would have absolutely been in a worse version of this movie. Yeah, I agree with that for sure. Yeah, it's interesting that you bring up Sean Gunn and Cosmo, because I think that another thing this movie does really well is resolve kind of everybody's ongoing bullshit, right? Which you get a lot in like kind of like the denouement, right? But I actually really appreciated for Drax. I had a dumb issue with Drax, which is that the law of Drax's comedy from before was getting broken a lot here, which really bothered me on a dumb level. Like on a this doesn't matter to anyone but me, but I just noticed like a million times where he uses some sarcastic euphemism that he would not use because he cannot perceive sarcasm. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It happens all the time. Or metaphor is really what it is, right? Like, he is an entirely literal being. He cannot understand figurative speech. That got broken all the time, but I sort of don't care, right? Because he actually did get a real resolution to his pretty minor overall character arc, but like the thing of where he's just a dad. The kids love him because he's funny, and that was nice. But I feel like everybody got that, right? Even these minor characters like Cosmo kind of gets her heroic moment. She gets called a bad dog and then gets called a good dog, right? It's like all that stuff goes together and is satisfying. So even though like kind of the core drama is really owned by Rocket and Nebula and Star-Lord, right? Everyone on the team and in the intervening gets their own little arcs to play out, right? Adam Warlock gets this. Even Groot gets it to a sort of minor extent. And it's just like that's nice. That's good. I like that. That's cool.
Yeah, no, I agree. So in terms of like, salvaging like stuff from the previous stuff, right? Like I think Adam Warlock was kind of like the best you could hope to do with him. And so, and maybe he's got a bigger role moving forward or whatever, but like I thought Adam Warlock was well utilized for what he was, right? Like, just like little bits and pieces of stuff, since he's like didn't really have any setup, didn't really have any like, his setup was like set up, I think it was in 2, right, where they kind of like forewarn him and then it just kind of like happens, right? Like I thought, obviously he doesn't get a ton of screen time, but I thought it was like well done enough that it felt good, and if it kind of like drove home the themes, right? It's like the Guardians of the Galaxy are ultimately good guys, and kind of like there's like not a lot of moral ambiguity about the Guardians of the Galaxy, right? They are good guys, right? Like they might be a little bit salty and rough edged, but they are good guys, and they like Adam Warlock just kind of like they don't kill him, and it's like why, and then like again, another thing you could have seen coming from a mile away, right? Like, Star-Lord is going to jump off of the ship, and he's not. I was like, when I saw that he had to go back for the Zune, I was like, oh, this is where Adam Warlock comes and saves him. In fact, I was a tiny bit annoyed because I thought it was so obvious, and they pulled it out. They stretched it out so much. I'm like, Adam Warlock is going to solve this problem, right? Just like fucking get on with it, right? But like maybe I'm a little too media savvy for a little bit more media savvy than your average viewer or something like that. But I thought it was the best you could hope to do with him, I guess.
Yeah, it's kind of like it's like getting a 100 on a piece of homework. Yeah. It's like you did it. It is not a very important part of your final grade for the semester, but like you got all the points you could out of it. Good job, kind of thing. Yeah, right.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that.
Yeah, and I like Adam Warlock as a sort of a continuation of a theme, which is that like the villains are actually like if you treat the villains with empathy, they become good guys, right? Which is something that happens twice, kind of from Guardians 1 to Guardians 2, with Nebula and Mantis joining the team, and then doing the same thing in Guardians 3, having the guy from sort of the bad guy from 2, or like the setup bad guy from 2 becoming a good guy in 3. Like that just is in keeping with everything that I want it to be in keeping with, and I'm super down and super fine with that. It's funny too because this is like a media poison moment. It's like we are poisoned by the way that we consume this media. I loathed this conversation I was overhearing as I was walking out of the theater, where people were talking about, oh, those are the new those are the new Guardians. Do you think they're going to do a new movie with them? What is that going to be like? It's like, buddy, that's not the point. The point is not that they set up a new team of Guardians, right? And that team consisted of, right, this group of people. The point is that some people kind of reached their conclusion with the Guardians, but Rocket didn't, Groot didn't, right? And there are new people who need the Guardians and are adopted into the ecosystem. Like Adam Warlock needs the Guardians, and becomes a true Guardian at the end of this movie, because in the same way that becoming a Guardian was for someone like Star-Lord, and he eventually realized that he moved past it, right? The same sort of thing happened with Adam Warlock, right? And I just like the idea that it was set up, I felt like was really obvious. It's not set up. There's no Guardians 4 featuring Rocket's team, right? It is just leave, but that is the natural state of where these characters are left, in the same way that it's kind of the natural state for like Mantis to be left as the sort of leader of nowhere or whatever else. And I don't know, I just wanted to roast those guys because I hated that hearing them talk about it as we were walking out of the theater.
No, that is fair. And like, I'm not gonna lie, I was wondering how they were gonna play that, because I did notice that the last shot of the movie was the legendary Star-Lord will return, not the Guardians will return. So, you know, who knows where that will go. But you know, but that's like you're right. Like that's like maybe like, I don't know. I don't think there's any problem with like idly speculating about like if they're gonna do something with that. But like, you know, I agree. The point is about the group. Although I do,
yeah, I mean, I am mildly interested. I did notice the same thing, right? That Star-Lord is the one who is going to return, but not anyone else. I don't know what that means, and I kind of don't want to or care all that much. Like, maybe he joins the Avengers. That's probably the best that I could come up with for what you do with a Star-Lord who is on Earth reconnecting with his grandpa, right?
yeah, I mean, maybe it's just kind of like you know, people who like Chris Pratt, he will still be around, right? Like, just like, if I want to put on my like cynical hat, it's like, you know, he is at a point where he could just exit the MCU, and given the number of people that are like, my time with the MCU is done, right? Like, you know, I think Hemsworth said he doesn't want to do any more Thor stuff, even though he's like not explicitly out. Or at least like he was tired of it or something like that. Even though he's kind of like potentially got like off ramp. But that's like my cynical take. Also, you know, James Gunn is running the DCEU at this point. So, you know, is he, you know, is the Guardians 4 even good if it's not by James Gunn? Or even like, does it lose its luster if it's not James Gunn? You know, that kind of thing. But like, I'm more interested in that and kind of like a, you know, backroom politics version of things than I am from like a pure plot version of things. Because, you know, the MCU, I guess, will never die, and we're going to get these movies forever or something. And some of them will be good, like this one, and some of them will be Black Widow.
Yep. Some of them will be Shang-Chi. Yay!
Yeah.
Who's excited? Yeah, I do think that there is a version of speculating that's fun. For instance, at the end of Avengers Age of Ultron, right? You get a setup for a different Avengers team, which they didn't even run with, right? Because they immediately just go right into Civil War, essentially, which just completely writes the structure of that whole team. But the thing I really wanted, was that moment of emotional resolution, I guess, which is why I'm protective kind of it or whatever. Like, I think it's fair to speculate on something like the Justice League or the Avengers. This is always a fun moment, right? A member of the Avengers leaves. There's a little roster shuffle. You get new people on the team. They're doing new stuff, right? You can imagine a team that doesn't have Captain America and Tony Stark and how that gets led, right? There's a version of the Justice League that's led by kind of Superman. There's a version that's led by Black Canary. There's a version that's led by Aquaman for a while. There's a version that's led by Batman. There's a counter team where Batman gets pissed off with the Justice League, so he starts his own superhero team called the Outsiders with Blackjack and hookers. And it's just like that stuff is fun, but I don't think it's fun for this moment or this movie, which is why it felt very
Yeah.
I don't know.
My most cynical take of this is like Guardians. The new Guardians are going to be like a Disney Plus series that like has 10 episodes or something, right? Like,
yeah, sure, true.
Where they can do Monster of the Week stuff instead of instead of having to deal with like the politics of having James Gunn not direct something, right? Like that's enough of a format switch that you don't have to worry about it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess my final thing about Guardians 3 is that I feel real good about the future of the DC universe being in James Gunn's hand. This guy is batting 1,000. I don't think that anybody has had a run quite like James Gunn, going from Guardians 1, 2, 3, the Peacemaker TV show, which to be fair I haven't watched, but everybody says it's good, and the Suicide Squad, which everybody loved, right? Including both of us. Like he's killing it, I guess, which feels good.
Yeah, I'm just curious because like I don't think I've seen any of his like like movie 43 or any of his pre Guardian stuff.
Wait, no way. He did movie 43?
He was a writer on movie 43, it looks like.
Oh my god, you're kidding. Movie 43 is a famously panned movie.
Really? He directed movie 43 as well. That was the thing. He directed it the year before Guardians. That was like
the I understand. Movie 43. Okay, so this makes sense. Movie 43 is a it's like a parody compendium movie or whatever. But it's like a bunch of little skits. And now that I'm looking at it, a lot of people directed bits
segments
in movie 43. So he did a bit, but like Elizabeth Banks did a bit. Bob Odenkirk did a bit, right? So yeah, he is one of a number of different people who were in this movie.
Yeah, because
okay.
I know that like he was known for like doing like gross out stuff at some point. Like maybe that like, one of his credits is PG porn. So he directed Slither as well. Maybe that's I know he like some of his like around the time that like he got booted off of Guardians because people decided to be mad on the internet, right? Was like stuff from his era when he was like super edgy, right? Like and that's I know what his sort of initial stuff was. So yeah. But yes, I agree. Since Guardians, it's been what? Guardians 2, Suicide Squad, Peacemaker. I have not watched. Did you watch the holiday special? Because I never did.
I never did.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just to put that nail in this coffin because it's funny. Movie 43 was panned by critics, with some considering it one of the worst films ever made. It received an average of 18 out of 100 on Metacritic on 23 critics, and on Rotten Tomatoes, the film has a 4% positive rating. Brian Gibson describes movie 43 as an execrable waste cooked up by a Hell's Kitchen of directors and writers. It's death of laughter by committee. Its title because it's one of those many asteroids out there, a dismal chunk of rock hurtling through an empty void without purpose. I watched movie 43 and I remember thinking it was kind of so bad that it's good. Like sort of like The Room, not a very different version of The Room. The Room is so bad that it's good in kind of like, what is up with Tommy Wiseau, right? Movie 43 is how on earth did they get Hugh Jackman to say these lines? It's like that bad. I would really be interested to know which bit James Gunn directed
Beazle
in
is
here.
What it says on IMDb.
Beazle?
Yeah, I don't know.
Okay.
Or Bezel maybe. I haven't seen the movie, so I don't know.
Maybe I'll watch movie 43 at some point. I'm sure it's on some streaming service somewhere, and I can find it. It is incredible the kind of talent that they got for this. Like a bunch of famous people are in this movie. And they just have them doing the most wild things. And I was like, is this the point of the movie that we're gonna get like Academy Award winner Kate Winslet to say the word shart or whatever it was? Like is that
Okay. Yeah. I
okay?
yeah. I don't know anything. I did not know the can of worms I was going to open when I said movie 43. Yeah. Speaking of
Well,
fucking The Room, in the previews to my fucking movie, apparently The Room is getting like one of those like phantom. You know how they sometimes run old films in the theaters, right? Like every year, I know AMC and Regal both do Ghibli Fest every year.
yeah.
Um, where they just like run all the Ghibli films because people love the Ghibli films. Fucking Tommy Wiseau is re-releasing The Room through like Fandango, right? Like on like in theaters for one day here this year. And it says like, "Hi, I hope you come see my movie, The Room, in theaters again this year," right? Like, fucking ridiculous. You know?
Okay. I did not know that actually.
Yeah. I only knew that because it played before the fucking movie, right? Like, um, speaking of which, this is the first time I'd seen anything about the Marvels, and I don't know if I care about that movie at all. I'm sure we will see it because we see it, but like,
I mean, it seems like I need to watch the TV show. I don't know. Ms. Marvel is a weird thing. She is a very popular comic book series
right,
that came out after I had kind of quit reading comics. So this is sort of in a position where I don't know what I'm looking for or what I'm
right,
going to see. Do you know what I mean?
yeah,
So
yeah. I don't. There's some characters that feel like they don't translate well to real life, and like from the like little trailer I saw, like that was before this movie, I got kind of like America Chavez vibes, where like the real life character just like doesn't quite map to the comic book character, at least what I know about it, right? I
yeah,
felt that way about this version of Kamala Khan, and maybe that's just a matter of like like maybe it's also hard to do Reed Richards, right? Just because like the how they look just like doesn't quite work right without like the appropriate amount of right. Like the Hulk can work because he's always like CG, whereas like somebody who's like close enough to human but kind of needs to not look human. Like I think it'd be really hard to do like Plastic Man as a movie because you couldn't like have him be like a CG Plastic Man the entire time, right? And he looks like a normal person. You'd be like, this kind of feels like not stylized enough to be like the comic book character that I'm picturing in my head. Um, I don't know. Maybe I'm crazy, but like that's kind of that was my impression about when I saw the trailer for the Marvels.
yep. No, I agree with you 110%. I'm down. That makes sense.
Um, yeah, I think that TV series comes out in like a week or two on Disney Plus. Um,
Okay.
yes,
You know,
Nick Fury's Secret
I
Wars.
I have been watching some of these things to kind of like catch up. Obviously, I caught up on The Boys, catching up on Ted Lasso or whatever. So I plan to get into some of this stuff, like The Falcon and Winter Soldier, in the not too distant future. But
I
we'll
I thought
see.
Loki was good. I don't know if you've seen Loki yet or not, but
I have not seen Loki. I had intended to get started on Loki, but I kind of never got there. I need to do Peacemaker also, right?
yeah, me too.
Yeah.
I have to do Mandalorian season 2, so I'm
Oh
way
my
behind.
god. True.
I'm
God, what a it's funny how insanely huge The Mandalorian was to have fallen off so hard, right? Like The Mandalorian season 3 came out, I didn't hear a fucking peep.
yeah. I heard. So I basically I read headlines from Eric Kane, and basically it seemed like it was started good, low in the middle, and ended strong. Um,
Okay. I heard that people really hated it because of the Book of Boba Fett.
yeah, the Book of Boba Fett
There's
was apparently bad. Um,
Yeah, there's something about the Book of Boba Fett where it kind of serves as like the Mandalorian season 2.5 because it
uh,
ties in a bunch with what's going on with the Mandalorian. And if you watch that, you won't understand the Mandalorian. People are pissed about this. So I don't know. We'll see. I haven't dug into any of this. Obviously, the last Star Wars thing. Honestly, I'm in a great place with Star Wars. Me and Star Wars are getting along fine. Okay, because I watched Andor and now it's just the greatest. Like,
I need to watch Andor too. Yeah, I it is weird to me to like have fallen so out of love with Star Wars. Like I used to adore Star Wars, and I don't hate it now. I just like there would be a time where like Star Wars thing happening, I'm there, right? Like
Yep.
yeah, you know what? Fucking I can since we're gonna transfer into our weeks. I like saw this at like an antique store. I don't know where they got it from, but like I picked this like piece of this concept art print. This is the
Oh, look at that.
yeah, from the
Naboo.
Phantom Menace. So I'm like, this is fucking rad. I'm gonna pick this up. But like, I just like, I don't know. George Lucas is an auteur. Apologize to George.
Apologize to George. I agree. Yeah. I also think that I don't know. Like it's the two Star Wars things I've done recently were the Obi-Wan series, which I liked quite a lot. There's a lot of prequel sort of fan service. Or not prequel fan service. That's actually a really bad way of putting it. It is a movie that takes seriously the prequels and the drama of the prequels in the way that I take seriously the movies of the prequels and the drama of the prequels, which is why I liked it a lot. I do know that people didn't like it, and I think that they're dumb. And then Andor, obviously, which also takes in a wildly different direction, also takes the drama of the prequels very seriously, in terms of like the Senate politics and everything like that. But just also features like a really show's really good. That show's honestly, yeah, that show's really good. So yeah, I know I'm in a good place with Star Wars, but me and Star Wars are like we're kind of. Have you ever had a fight with a friend and you're kind of not talking? You know what I mean? It's like, hey, the last time you and I talked, we fought for like 2 hours. Okay, things are a little tense. We apologized maybe a little bit, right?
Things
But
will eventually be fine, but not right now.
we're keeping our distance. No pressure. We're to do whatever because you don't want to tread on any open wound, right? That's sort of where I'm at with Star Wars. I feel like.
Yeah, no, I mean, I don't know. I don't know what the next like Star Wars thing is going to be, and if it's gonna like the fact there's no like hype cycle around Star Wars, I think is good. And the fucking Galactic Star Cruiser thing is shutting down, so
I saw that. Yeah, that thing was dumb as fuck though.
Yeah,
so.
yeah. Canon though, right? Like like Sprite, right? Like,
Yep.
God.
Anyway, so what is with your week? Tell me all about it.
Yeah, so big things I did this week were play Diablo and play Street Fighter. In terms of like nerd stuff.
Okay, let's talk about Street Fighter because you're gonna talk about Diablo. I'm sure. So
yeah, so Street Fighter, not much to say. I'm still running sets, right? Like, people are figuring out tech, right? Like JP is super impressive early, and people are slowly figuring out how to deal with this bullshit. So JP is like a super hardcore zoner that also has like a bunch of tools to deal with like traditional anti-zoning stuff. But like people are figuring out how to deal with the tech, right? Like he's not great at the mid range. There are more ways to get through his fireballs than like you might initially think. And it's just going to be a matter of learning him, is I think the current thing. People are mad about E Honda, right? Like your classic scrub quote. Like E Honda for the first time is like E Honda historically has just kind of been like an E Honda's here too type character, right? Notable because like you mash punch to do his 100 hand slap. They've gotten rid of that input. I think it's on a quarter circle now for your classic controls. But his headbutt is really strong in this game. Essentially, like his powerful move went from being his 100 hand slap to being his headbutt. It's apparently a very big noob killer. That and the Blanca's ball. And so all the people who don't know how to deal with it are mad, and all the people that do know how to deal with it are laughing. He's like what was the tweet I saw? Is like, so it's like Honda players, what's your favorite flavor of crayon? And then somebody drew a response like, is Honda holding a red? It's like, I saved the red one for you. Like.
It's actually really funny.
Yeah, people mad about Honda, but it's I am not particularly highly ranked. I don't know if you saw, but Trin Immortal was running sets with Jamie, which I thought was fun to watch because like it was like, oh, I can understand this content now. And Trin Immortal is not particularly good. Like, Trin Immortal was always kind of like a mid-level league player, right? Like the best of his friend, kind of, I guess, Basement King is like the way I'd put it, even though that doesn't really work for, are you familiar with the concept of Basement King?
Like you're the best in your friend group kind of thing.
Yeah. So like the traditional Basement King definition is like, this is like pre-internet, right? Like you were the guy who consistently pushed people's shit in at like Smash Brothers with your group of friends in like your friend's basement, right? Or in your basement.
But then you go to Evo and get like bodied in the first round.
Or you go to a local and you get bodied hard, right?
Right.
Like,
okay. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so that like obviously doesn't quite work in the modern internet age since everybody's against everybody, but like Trin Immortal kind of had that, like, he's clearly better than his group of friends that he plays with. So he gets to kind of like call the shots, but he's like not the world's greatest player or whatever. Like I think at his height he was like plat or something, maybe. And similarly with Street Fighter, or none of these playing against people, but like, he's like silver. I am worse than him. I am like working my way up through iron, and part of that is I am like still not used to my my leverless controller. And so I'm learning some of that, but like, he is definitely better than me, but like better than me and not like in a way that like I feel like I can learn from him like as a stepping stone type of deal, right? Like I could go watch, I think his name is Snake Eyes, play Zangief and like not understand what's happening, or like not be able to implement any of that, right? Like you can get some stuff from that, but like watching like a mid-level player I think is much more useful for me personally, because like I'm not dealing with the same types of problems, right? Like oh man, there's this weird problem, and this happens in a lot of games. It's like you can get really good at like noob stomping, but that won't carry you into the higher ranks of things, right? Like, this is like being like a really good Yi player, right? At least when we were playing League of Legends, right?
Yeah.
Or like the example I have heard is like this is like a story. I might have heard it on like a podcast. It's like, in wrestling, like there are these two guys that were learning how to wrestle, and one guy like did this like big grapple move and would like take people out at once, and the other person just kind of like struggled with the fundamentals and didn't like. In their first year they wrestled, the first guy won a bunch of rounds and like did really well. The second guy didn't, but their second year people knew how to deal with the first guy's bullshit, and like he didn't really win anything, whereas the second guy had like built up enough that he was like consistently starting to win again. So that kind of thing. Whereas like I know I get away with a lot of bullshit in Iron that I shouldn't be able to, right? Like you could just kind of like grab people because people are trying to hit buttons, and you don't, that's like, that's lesson number one is like stop hitting buttons, right? Like, anybody who knows what they're doing, you just like throw a button out, they will block it and punish the fuck out of you, right? And I know that intellectually, but I'm not quite there like in practice, because there's kind of like a level of like the game that you like play in your mind and then like having to execute that, right? Like big part of my problem is execution, right? Like I can't like consistently pull off combos and whatnot, but
no, I understand this completely, because this is Hearthstone, right? You're essentially speaking Hearthstone is the same thing, right? Where it's like, oh, for instance, I was talking about my super deck, my Control Warrior deck, right, that I was playing. The thing that made that deck interesting and good in a way that people didn't expect is I was playing a homebrew deck in a version of things where they weren't expecting it, right? Because I was playing a deck that maybe they were familiar with the core concept, but I had ripped out half the engine and I had replaced this with this kind of weapon engine that was unique to me. So I was doing stuff with weapons that they were just like not prepared for. And I was playing against meta decks, right? And I have perfect knowledge of the meta decks. I know the 30, like I've never played a second of Pure Paladin, but I know the 30 card list by heart, right? And so I know how to punish the like a low, let's say a high diamond. I'm probably high diamond MMR, maybe legend MMR, probably player or whatever, right? I know how to punish that player playing Pure Paladin because they're playing a deck list I understand completely. I'm playing a deck list they have no conception for what I'm doing, right? And I feel like there's a lot of power in that sort of uneven matchup of like mastery of what your opponent is in the meta. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, and part of the problem here too is like, at least with like Hearthstone, right? Like at high high elo Hearthstone, right? Like you probably have some people who are just kind of like net decking and kind of like coasting off the power of the deck, and that's kind of where you get some of those imbalances. In like a fighting game too, especially at the lower levels, it's even worse than that because like, I am playing the big muscle lady. I want to do the big punch, right? The big punch is super like, super minus on block or whatever, right? Like, or it's like it's super telegraphed. And if you're not like, if you're not an idiot, you see it coming and you parry, or you block and you punish, or like, you jump over it and you throw or something, right? Or like when you stand, like, the big one is like, when I stand up, half the time I just like throw out a throw because people are gonna like throw out like a slow moving normal, and it's like it's gonna beat it, and they're not gonna be expecting it. And I'm quickly getting to the point where I'm starting to like hit people who know how that all goes, but it's like a little bit too much offense, not enough kind of like technical mastery, and that's me too. It's just a matter of moving through that.
Yeah, I feel that for sure. It's like there are certain decks in the metagame which are built to do things, and they will just punish other like other archetypes, which is part of what I'm farming a little bit when I'm playing an off meta deck, right? When my deck is built to create a 2028 taunt that you can't target with spells or hero powers, that just hard stops certain things because they're not built to deal with that as a threat, right? And I feel like that when you're in the low level of like a fighting game, you're kind of in the same sort of situation, right? Where people aren't playing optimally, and that can kind of like mess you up in a way. And you can scam people, right? You can get away with shit, right? That you wouldn't normally be able to because like they don't have the appropriate counter.
Yeah, scamming shit like that feels like they're like it works a little differently in fighting games, so you don't really have the power to like. You can't really scam high level players because like they know what's gonna like it's not like you can like switch out a move set for a character, at least not in like the normal way you play Street Fighter, right? But you can scam lower level players who just don't know how to deal with certain things. So like I think that's a good
Yeah, scam shit is scam shit in Hearthstone is like I'm playing a really synergistic combo that like breaks if I draw one card, right? And like for instance, I talked about a warlock deck I was playing called Chadius Warlock, where you're playing Thaddeus and you're putting him in a slime or whatever. That's a scam deck, right? Basically, do I have the slime? Do I have Thaddeus on turn 5? Can I slime, activate, play Thaddeus, play a bunch of 1 mana, 10 mana cards, right? And just like no one can respond to it. No one can beat that,
man.
right? But the problem is that happens 1 out of every games, like
So that is super interesting because I uninstalled Marvel Snap this week mostly because I just think it was taking too much of my time. But like, that's interesting because like Marvel Snap like systemizes scam decks, right? Because like you retreat at 1 cube on decks on like where you don't have your scam, right? Like, but you like boost up and you play out your scam when you've got your scam in hand, right? Like there's a lot of decks that like work like that, right? Like Galactus is a deck that works like this, right? Like you figure out a way to cheat out Galactus early, and you like destroy half the board, and then you have some closer. Because so the way Galactus works is you throw him down. If you have to throw him down in a location where you don't have any other things.
Well, then he kills the other 2 locations.
Is he blows up the other 2 locations. Yeah.
Okay. Funnily enough, I've heard about Galactus because he's such a hard scam.
Yeah, but like there are a couple of decks that kind of like are like, because it's funny because like the game almost encourages you to play a scam deck, right? Or like like a late winning deck, because like if you are playing like solid tempo, right, and you like build up like, and you're clearly gonna win, your opponent's gonna retreat before you can like snap, right? You have to snap early when you're not sure about it, right? Whereas like with the scam, with your Galactus deck or your other, there's like a couple other things that work like this, right? Like, you draw like, there's like a vanilla deck where like Patriot gives +2 to all cards without text, and then like you play Mystique, which copies that, and then like, you have a bunch of other stuff, and then you play like Ultron, which fills the rest of your locations with 1/1s, right? Like, and that kind of like can bomb late, and like you can predict it a little bit, but or like
that's really interesting. Yeah, because one of the things about scam decks in Hearthstone is you're not supposed to play them, right? Like, so for instance, the Vicious Syndicate podcast which is like the high end. These are the guys who are like essentially data scientists for what high end Hearthstone looks like, right? Who have referred to in like previous iterations of this stuff. They tell you not to play scam decks because the point of playing a Hearthstone deck is you want to play a deck that wins essentially 51 or higher percent of the time, right? This is a tier 2, tier 1 deck kind of thing. It has favorable matchups against other decks in the format, and it'll tell you a bit about what those matchups are like. And so it's like, oh, well, if you're fighting a lot of control priests, add this card because it adds 5% to your win rate, right? If you're playing this thing, it's all about that. It's all about that win rate. Scam decks have garbage win rates, right? But they feel fun to play because when you pull off your scam, it just is like, God, that's satisfying, right? But the thing about Marvel Snap that's interesting, in Hearthstone, a game of Hearthstone is only ever worth 1 win or 1 loss. Yeah. But you can have a game of Snap that is worth 8 wins, right? If you know, obviously that's a rarity, right? If you snap all the way or whatever. But like, because you can gain more in a single game, and your deck is, even if your deck is built around a 20% win rate, right? Theoretically speaking, under those conditions, right?
Yeah.
You could still gain MMR. You could still, I'm sorry, not MMR.
Rank, whatever.
Rank,
yeah,
right?
Yeah.
You can still gain rank by just playing up your scam games and just getting the fuck out on your off games, right?
Yeah. And the other part of this too is like scams are easy to pull off because like, it's a 12 card deck. You start with effectively 4 of them, and like, normally you're gonna pull through like most of your deck, right? So like, like I got Galactus and I played a few games with him just for fun, and like, getting the combo off for Galactus is actually relatively easy. The thing is like building the rest of the deck in a way that you can then convert and turn that into a win, which is like not as if you maximize getting Galactus out, you don't necessarily have the engine to kind of like pull away.
Oh, sure. Like you still lose. Yeah. I love
like
that is
the best win I ever had is I saw what was happening, and I knew, like, I was like, oh, he's probably running Galactus. And on the turn where he was played Galactus, I played Professor X like across from him, and Professor X locks down the lane, like doesn't let you play anything. And so like he plays his 6-2 Galactus and I play my 5-3, probably both off of a wave or something in the same lane, and it's just locked out, and I can't lose, right? Like, and so obviously he immediately retreats, but it's just like, oh, fuck you, I got you.
Oh no, I live for moments like that in Hearthstone. I did this once against or not once, but like recently. I did this recently against a control priest where I baited out a whirlpool with I was talking about the 2028. So the way that this works is there is a 6 mana 4/8 in the format called Sun Fury Stalwart. Sun Fury Stalwart is like he's 6 mana 4/8 taunt rush, and he can't be targeted by spells or abilities, which is the important part. And I had Black Rock and Rolled, so I increased my whole deck by their mana cost. That makes Sun Fury Stalwart a 10/16, right? And then I had Lorthamard, which doubles all the stats of the minions in your decks. That makes him a 20/32, right? So I had played a Sun Fury Stalwart in order to bait a piece of removal, but and so I played the 20/32 in order to burn through all of this removal that I knew he had that was on creatures, in order to get around that essentially elusive text or whatever. But in my hand, I had a 0 mana 40/48 or something like that. Because I had doubled the stats. There's another card called Last Stand. You draw a taunt minion, double its stats, right? So I doubled the 20. I'm sorry, it would have been a 40/64. So you burn through his removal on the first one, play the second one, and it's like, yes, this is the kind of victory that you want, right? Mind game the fuck out of your opponent. Or I'm also a big fan of combo concede, right? Where you watch someone who is setting up a combo and you just hit them with like an unwinnable game state, and they perform their combo, but their combo isn't enough to win. And so they just they put all the combo pieces in play, they execute the combo, and then they concede because they know they're going to lose on board next turn or whatever it's, right?
Yeah, no. That's so much fun.
We ended up talking about Street Fighter and Hearthstone or whatever. Diablo 4 is like all that I have been doing.
That has been most of what I've been doing. Yes.
Yeah, I am level 57. I'm really deep into what I would call tier 3, where I'm getting closer and closer to not prestiging, to the capstone dungeon in tier 3, which is going to get me into tier 4, which is the capstone for right now, right? I think it's Torment. Right now we're in Nightmare, and I'm getting into Torment. So are you in Nightmare right now?
No, I need to do the capstone. I'm level 49. As I told Buddy before the pre-chatter, I hit credits like an hour before the podcast, maybe a little bit earlier than that. And I went and I did the Whispering Tree in Veteran just because that was like the next thing to do, and I was curious about it. But I'm like playing real Diablo now is the way I put it sometimes, right? Just because like there's like it. I know I feel like I shouldn't really be like maximizing my gear until like you hit like it's like 50. That's like the like the real cap, or like the kind of like soft cap, right? Like
Yeah. Well, so what level are you right now?
49.
Oh, okay. Yeah. 50 is when you get your last skill point and you start getting Paragon points.
Yeah.
And it is also when you start, your item levels are variant, and you're still gaining, like, I don't really know how it works. But like you're gaining item level 500 to 700, right? And 700 is higher end. I don't know. I was talking with a friend of mine. He was like, when you get an item level 700 thing, that's like, you know, I don't know. It's good. I'm getting item level 700 stuff now because I've just kind of walked up that item level.
Yeah.
Train.
No, I mean, this is, like WoW, since like we've said, WoW and Diablo are converging, right? Like, there's like that easy climb, I feel like, up to that point, right? And like while you're in the easy climb, it feels bad to like burn your nice aspects, right? And so I am holding back on like really like like turbo glomping a build together until I get to like a slightly better place. But yeah.
Are you still running that same build from last week?
So I'm running weapon switching now because I found like weapon switching legendary. I like the weapon switching build better. I've just switched to I assume that this was like a universal thing. Like, does everybody get like the ring off of Lilith?
Yeah, the unique ring off of Lilith. Yep.
Yeah. So I switched from like double swing to upheaval, and I also managed to pick up a couple of maces. So I'm running bash on 2 hands, just for the combo stuff. And I'm still getting used to that rhythm because my rhythm before was like bash, double swing, and then out of the double swing while they're vulnerable, hit them with the execute, get like big executes. Upheaval obviously doesn't have that vulnerable stuff, but it does have a couple, and it works with a couple of my other legendaries. And it the big thing is it hits a large area, and so then I'm proccing the refund mechanic off the ring. And so I'm getting used to that, but I am running a passives build, essentially. Although I feel like I am more fragile than I should be. And so I'm part of this too is like up until I hit like the skill point cap, I was just kind of like throwing points around, and so I might more carefully allocate them and give myself a little bit more survivability.
Yeah, I was running a weapon switching build for a long time, and I quite liked it. The third, you were so right about the third legendary. The third ultimate. So I started with Call of the Ancients, and then I was doing a berserking build for a while. I kind of finished the game with this berserking build, which included Wrath of the Berserker. It was basically just all berserking all the time. I had a legendary that turns you on fire, and you're just constantly spitting fire damage, right? But I ended up trying Iron Arsenal, I think is what it's called, and it's just my favorite shit. Like, it is. I have not switched off it since. Even in builds where it's probably correct for me to be running something different, I just keep up with Iron Arsenal. I have put gem slots on all of my weapons so that I could put diamonds in there so that I can increase my ultimate damage. Like, it is so dumb and so fun, and I love every second of Iron Arsenal. I have finally swapped off of Ground Stomp. I'm not running Ground Stomp anymore, but for a while I was running basically just Iron Arsenal every 20 seconds the build, right? Because it was weapon switching all the time to get the CDR on, and then Ground Stomp in order to get more Iron Arsenals. But I have finally run out of my Ground Stomp legendary synergies, and I need a little. I ended up going back to the bleed build just because the bleed build is fucking insane for some reason. It is so powerful, and I don't understand why. Not that I have looked up any endgame stuff or whatever. I just feel like I never fucking die because there's a legendary that gives you a bunch of damage reduction for each bleeding enemy nearby. And then there's a bunch of stuff where you get your rend stacks up. You're taking 24%, so it's like 50% DR just with one legendary, one talent point, basically. And then you just bleed everything up and let it all fucking die. Oh, I also got two other things that were fun. One of which was basic attacks have extra attack speed, so my basic attacks get real fast. And another one that's every 5 basic attacks, your next core does like a bunch of extra damage, right? So the idea there is you just flay, and then do a big rend, and just everything you hit in that cone just bleeds out basically instantaneously. I now found another piece of this, which is when you're berserking, all the damage that you do inflicts a bleed, which is my very newest piece of the build. So I have added in a little berserk synergy with the execute. I'm back to death blow. I eventually got really fed up with death blow just because, like, I don't know, it's just not getting the reset feels so fucking bad.
I get that.
But now I basically don't really care whether or not I get a reset. I'm just using it to activate berserking because it's like, okay, I'm gonna activate berserking and then I'm gonna iron arsenal everything in the 2-second window, and I'm gonna put a gigantic 60%. It's basically adding 60% extra damage onto technically 85% damage onto any big huge ability that you can do. And it just like rips these things.
Yeah, that sounds super fun. Yeah, no, I've just hit the end game, which is kind of like a real Diablo.
Yeah.
What did you think of the story?
Oh, I love the story. So the one piece of the story. This is spoilers, by the way.
Yeah, spoilers for Diablo 4. Yeah,
and I would recommend going unspoiled because it was a very good story. The one thing I'm a little depressed about, but I like the decision, so I'm not mad about this. Is that we never fought Inarius, right?
Yeah.
That Inarius kind of dies in this cutscene where he and Lilith kind of just fight one another, but just like it was such a good moment and such a classic, like Blizzard cutscene that I loved every fucking. The moment where she's like, their silence is your judgment is just, oh, holy fuck. That hits me where I live in terms of just like cool shit that is, I don't know. It's very like big and operatic and tragic. And the way that, he's so sure that he's going to kind of get back into the high heavens, but he doesn't, and he's freaking out. It's just like, this is like what I'm made for. I loved every aspect. I also just really loved the drama with Mephisto is great. Where the kind of question is like, oh, how are we gonna do this thing? Neyrelle chooses to imprison Mephisto in the Soul Stone, rather than imprisoning Lilith in the Soul Stone, which is neat and interesting. And now he's out there as like, I guess kind of our cliffhanger. My hope is that Diablo will get kind of more story updates kind of like as we go. I quite like the story of Diablo 3. I know not a lot, but I kind of think they're wrong. And I would be really interested to see. I guess I don't know. Is Tyrael dead?
I think they say at some point that he ran away, right? Like he was living with Lorath and Donan, and then he like ran away and they never saw him again in the Herodric Vault.
Yeah, because
I'm sure he'll come back at some point, right? Like he is like, he's like in the he is wherever he is, right? Like just kind of like untracked, I assume.
Yeah, so because I don't super remember what the status quo at the end of Reaper of Souls was with Malthael, though I loved Malthael.
Yeah, I don't either. I mean,
yeah, whatever. After the Nephilim defeated Malthael, Tyrael saw his companion in new light, while the hero this doesn't count. Whatever. Whatever. I want to see a return of classic Diablo things. Obviously, Diablo himself as as the Lord of Terror is sweet. Though I am happy to hang out with uh, Mephisto in the meantime. And yeah. Well, we'll see. My hope is that, and people's expectation seems to be that the seasonal content will advance the story in like small ways, right? That kind of like an expansion patch in WoW would do. So
Makes
you know,
sense.
yeah.
Something that I thought was neat was you in Caldeum you can find like the area that used to be the town for Act 2 in Diablo 3. Like I just happened to be walking through it and I was like, "Oh, I recognize this place."
Yep.
That's like, I thought that was neat.
There is a Alcanis, which is a boss thing in Diablo 3 because you find out that I can't even remember her name. What's the witch that is like secretly working for Diablo and steals the Black Soul Stone? You fight her there, and it's like it's just neat to kind of go back to this side of the to like this side of the whatever and get into all the nitty gritty.
Yeah. Um yeah, especially like seeing like Caldeum like ruined because it was so pretty in the last game. I thought that was neat.
Yeah, there's a bunch of stuff with like the Iron Wolves too. You also fight
Yeah.
alongside in the Diablo 3, campaign or whatever. I'm a big fan.
Yeah.
This game has been pretty great. Made $666 million apparently. They just like did a whole thing about that because it's the evil number.
Yeah, my favorite was definitely I don't know if you've been following it, but New York was getting smoke from Canada.
Yeah.
And there was this shot that was it was a billboard in New York City that said for Diablo 4 that said New York, welcome to hell, and the sky is just bright orange from the wildfire blowover. I thought that was super funny. But yeah. But yes, everybody's real mad at Activision Blizzard. They made, $750 million on Diablo, right? Like already, right? Like,
To be fair, I feel like this is good. I would make the argument this is good, right? I don't think it is a predatory, like game or experience. It is, an incredibly polished, really well developed game.
I have hit some bugs. Like,
oh, really?
I've hit a number of them. Like, I only figured this out because if you exit the game before you finish like a certain story beat, it'll like put you back a little bit. When you are crossing over into the into the palace where like Nero goes to stab, like the first time I did that, I clicked on Nero. She just kind of like walked through the portal. I'm like, what? And then I had to, like I had to stop playing. And when I came back, I had to do that section again, and then a cutscene played that I just didn't get the first time, right? I also got some like weird, like there was like definitely a texture missing during the fight with the second or like the one of the druids. There's like there have been like little things, and the worst one is I clicked on the serpent door while riding a horse, and it despawned me. And I couldn't do anything. And then I had left the game, and I would like freeze on load, like it wouldn't load me into the game. So I had to create another character, load into that character, and then log off, and then I could log back into my original character. So not perfect, but still pretty. Like the systems are polished. I don't know if the game is super well polished.
Fair enough. Yeah. So I am happy for the success of Diablo 4. And I hope it makes that transition that we talked about, right? Into kind of like a solid seasonal battle pass kind of game. Because I feel like that's like that was the question last week. Remains. I don't know when season 1 is supposed to start, but I have I got the version with the battle pass because I want to do the first season.
Yeah.
So we'll see.
Yeah, we will. All right. Well, we're way over time.
We are insanely over time. That's true.
Yeah. Oh man, there was a thing I wanted just very quickly. There's this video that I will send to you, and I'll try and put in the show notes about like it's called like why movies are different now, and it's about like modernism versus postmodernism versus metamodernism. And I think there's a thing there for us to talk about at some point. But I thought that was super interesting, and I had some thoughts on it. But I will leave that as a cliffhanger. meta modernism will return to some Derps talk about games. If you'd like to email us about any of the things we talked about in this podcast, email us at derpsplaygames@gmail.com or podcast@derpsplaygames.com. You can follow us at twitch.tv/derpsplaygames or youtube.com/@derpsplaygames where these go out live. We rate review us on iTunes or Spotify or wherever you can find podcasts. All links down in the description. Buddy, you have anything you're looking to promote?
I have one small thing that I'm looking to promote that'll be of interest to you a little bit, which is that the new Oracle for Australia comes out, or not comes out, but we are debuting it on Friday, and I'm doing that on a stream. So the Oracle Spotlight is gonna debut. I'm gonna play for probably about 2 hours, 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern, and I'm gonna show off some of the. This is where we're getting kind of into the end of of the game, and it's kind of its kind of structure. I feel like this character is going to be polarizing a little bit when people kind of get there, because so far we've only really talked about Mooney and Solarius is what most people have seen from the demo. I've obviously debuted Hevelius, who's built all around Sentinels, the little companions that you kind of have. And this fourth character has a bunch of new mechanics that I think are really neat and interesting. I'm showing that off on Friday, so yeah.
I don't care. Shark. All I need is my hammer and shark. No, I mean I will probably end up checking it out whenever this wonderful game gets released. But I'm looking forward to it.
Okay.
Yeah. With that, I'm gonna say until next time, dear listeners.
Until next time, loyal listeners.